So the first thing you're going to need is you're going to need a piece of coloured paper, and you're also going to need a piece of A4 paper, some scissors. My scissors are quite sharp, but you'll probably have the scissors that you have in school. Remember, with scissors you have to be really careful, making sure that you cut safely, that you carry your scissors safely. All of that is incredibly important. What you're going to do is you're going to take your piece of A4 paper, leaning into the camera there, and it can just be normal printer paper. It doesn't have to be anything that is particularly strong or durable. A4 printer paper is absolutely fine. And I'm going to be working on top of just black card, but you can work onto different coloured card. It's up to you. Whatever you have available you can use, but so long as there is a contrast, it'd be nice to see maybe a dark and a light, or quite a contrast between the bottom and the top layers that we are going to use. What you're going to do is you're going to create a paper sculpture. So I want to see your imagination coming through with how you can use paper creatively. How can you actually make a structure just using an A4 piece of paper and some glue? Now I've got this glue here. It's just a glue, a bit like PVA. You can use PVA glue, or you can use Pritt Stick. Pritt Stick will be absolutely fine. And you've just got to think about how you're going to stick the items down. What I'm probably going to do is I'm going to turn my camera around so that you can see what I'm doing down here rather than just looking at my face, because actually you need to see what I'm doing rather than looking at me. So I'm going to pause here and then I'm going to turn it round. Okay, I'm back again. You can see down here on my table that I've got the black card that I showed you originally, and I've got my white piece of paper. It's gotten a bit wrinkly actually, but that doesn't matter, because what I want you to do is I want you to start to think about how you can cut this into different shapes. And you can see here that I've got a strip of paper, and I just cut that off the end very safely, very carefully. And what can I actually do with it? I want you to think about how you can manipulate the paper to create something that is actually quite architecturally interesting. I wonder if you guys know what architecture is, or what job an architect does. It'd be interesting to see if you know that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think, okay, well, I quite like that shape there. So I'm going to keep the form of it, how I rolled it up, and I'm just going to put some glue onto the ends of it. Now, when you're doing this, you've got to think about how you can actually stick it down without losing the shape. Now, your glue, your Pritt Stick, might be actually better than my glue, because my glue, it might start to come undone a little bit. So I think what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to hold mine down. It's quite warm today, and just allow it to stick. But with a Pritt Stick, it will hold a little bit better. And although that isn't the original form, I actually really like that. It reminds me of a snail shell, or just a shell that I'd find at the beach actually, a hermit crab shell maybe, something along those lines. Okay, what can I do next? I'm going to leave that to dry, but I will keep my paper there so you can see. I think it looks better on the black paper what I'm doing. So now I'm going to start to be creative, and I'm going to start folding maybe into sort of triangles. There is absolutely no right or wrong. You can't get this wrong. And in fact, you might come up with something that is far more interesting than I've created. Often that happens at school. So at secondary school, I say to my students in year 7 all the way through to year 13, what you create is probably going to be better than what I'm going to demonstrate to you when I am doing a lesson. Because in a lesson at school, what I do is I sit down and I ask all the children to gather around me. So I ask them to come out of their seats, and they gather around a table at the front of my classroom, and I say to them, okay, I want you to watch how I would do it, and then I want you to have a go at doing it yourself. But I try and use as little time as possible at the front showing the students what to do, so that they have more time to do it themselves. And so actually often what they do turns out to be much better than what I've shown them in the demonstration that I've done. And I would imagine that today, when you're doing this, that yours is going to look much better than mine. Okay, so this is quite an interesting shape. Many more straight lines. So my other shape was quite curved. And this is far more geometric. Lots of triangles, bits of rectangles in there. And it's formed a different, interesting shape. Oh, there's my glue. My glue's not holding very well. Once you've stuck down your shapes, if you feel that you can fold it in a different way to get a better angle, then do so. Especially if the glue is holding it, you know, if you think, oh, that's not quite how I wanted it to look, change it. And that's the beauty of art, is that actually you don't really know how it's going to look. Even if you set out to do a beautiful painting, it might change along the way, and often these changes look better. Right, this one I'm going to roll, I'm simply going to roll it up. I'm going to go quite tight, like this. I think I'm going to bring it a little bit looser maybe, and I might just stick that down like that. When you're sticking down your structures, think about how it looks onto your paper. Try not to place everything all in one place. Think about the composition of the layout. So often we think about composition with music. When you compose a song and you put different layers of music together, whether it's the singing, the vocals, or whether it's percussion like the drums, you have layers that build it up. Well, with a piece of artwork, you've got to think about the layers that you are putting together, whether that's just flat drawing where you put things, or whether it's a sculpture, whether it's a painting or a collage. You've got to think about, how does it look? Is everything all clumped together, or has it actually got interest in all different sorts of places? So I've put 3 different things there. I don't want you to copy what I've done. I would be far more impressed if you start playing around with your paper and start to do something completely different. Here, I'll bring this down so you can see it a little bit better. I folded up some paper, cut a big chunk, and you can see my folded lines. I wonder if I can get it back into the same sort of shape that I had. Probably not, because I've unfolded it. Let's have a go anyway. I mean, that's not far off. And you can probably see what I've done is that I've cut out a section just with my scissors. And then when I opened it up, it's created almost like an enormous ladder. Now I really like that, and I've got to think about how I actually stick this down and where it would go. The other thing that you can do is you can cut out really, really fine bits and do some interesting cutting. So I'm going to just take a section off my paper there. And then maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to create lots of tiny, fine cuts and see how thin I can go with my paper. Can you see? Lots and lots of fine little strands there. And I can keep going. Almost reminds me of whiskers on a cat. Oh, that's my phone making a noise because I'm doing this on my phone at home because it's half term for me. And you keep going until you feel that it's looking quite interesting. And I quite like that effect there. And I'm going to cut it out, and then I might try and stick it down like this. So I'm going to put some glue on the bottom. Now what we're going to aim to do is not only make this very interesting paper sculpture, and you can imagine that once it's all created and you've got lots of things going on, imagine putting some light onto it and the different shadows that you could perhaps create. I think that would be rather interesting. I'm going to fold it the other way itself. Remember what I said about manipulating the paper once it's already stuck down so that it does something that you enjoy, that looks pleasing to the eye, that is aesthetic. What I'm going to do is I'm going to now stop the film, and I'm going to leave you to start the first part of this process. It might take you 20 minutes, it might take you half an hour to actually create some interesting sculptures all across your page. Think outside the box, and it doesn't all have to stick up. Some of it can lie flat, and you might want to layer interesting designs onto your piece of paper like this. You might want to use two pieces of paper together to perhaps create something that you couldn't do with one. You could go incredibly fine and thin. You could cut lots and lots of strips, long thin strips, stick them together and create a huge arch. That could look quite fantastic. Now this is quite small here, but you saw how I folded that together, and that could go something like that. So what I want you guys to do now is get your scissors, get your glue, get your piece of paper, the darker colour hopefully on the bottom, and then a white piece of paper to cut into, and start to play around with that paper. Once you've done that and you've stuck them down, then you can come to the second part of the video. So I'm quite excited to see what you guys have actually created. I wonder what your architectural paperworks look like. If I hold up mine, I'm not sure how you can sort of see it on all the different things I put on mine. Not many more actually than what I showed you on the film, but you can see it from a different angle. The next thing that we are going to do now that we've created that is we're actually going to use it as a drawing object. So at school, often what we have is we have drawing objects that we put down on the tables. It could be pine cones, it could be beautiful glass bottles, it could be shells, all sorts of different things. So today you're going to be drawing not from those objects, but from what you've just made, which is quite interesting. And I want you to think about which particular piece of paper you think would be quite good to draw from. So I've just had a go here, and you can see that I was drawing the curved one. Now I'm going to give you two options today. It's always nice to have an option. The first option is you can actually just draw your shape, and what I used here is I used a charcoal pencil and a chalk pencil to create that. And I really looked at the shape. I'm going to go through it with you so you can see what I've done. But it was this one here. Let me just lean in and grab it to show you. So where is it on the camera? There it is. So this shape here is the one that I worked from. And it had a bit of this section here as well, which has just come undone. But yeah, that's the area that I chose to draw from. But you might like a different one to choose. You might choose to do a different one. It's completely up to you which one you decide to go for. So that's option one, to draw it with maybe chalks or with pencils onto a piece of paper. Now I've chosen a blue card here because it made my dark charcoal and my white chalk stand out from each other. The next one that I'm going to show you is I'm actually going to be using watercolours. So hopefully you've got a choice of both. So these are my watercolours here. These are the watercolours we use at school. And I'm going to have a go at showing you how to do it, and maybe using complementary colours. I don't know if you know anything about complementary colours. Maybe your teacher has taught you already, which would be amazing if that has happened. But complementary colours are the colours opposite on the colour wheel, and they make colours really bright and stand out. So for instance, red and green are opposite on the colour wheel, and it makes, when red is next to green, it makes itself stand out really, really well. So a watermelon is nature's way of doing something that really sort of stands out and looks beautiful, but they don't mix together very well, those colours. Orange and blue are another set of complementary colours, and purple and yellow. So if I had a really beautiful scarf on that was purple, I might want to wear yellow earrings with it to make those colours stand out. But if I mixed them together when I was painting, those colours wouldn't look too good together. They would look a bit messy, a little bit brown. If you wanted to get brown, then that would be perfect. But most people don't want to get those colours. They're putting all the beautiful purples in, and they sort of mix in a yellow, and they think, oh, it's gone brown and it looks horrible. So you just have to be careful when you're using those colours that they don't sort of blend in together. And when you use watercolours, they do. They sort of bleed together. So I'm going to try and show you a bit of control and how to do that. I'm going to whiz you around again. I'm going to be working onto white card this time. You can use a heavy paper, a white paper, but try not to use a printer paper because it's too thin for watercolour. So hopefully you've got something that is nice to work on, and you can then see what it looks like. Okay. Hi guys, I've just turned my camera around and now you can see you're not looking at me, you're looking at my piece of paper down here. I've got a pencil. This is just a normal HB pencil, so probably what you have got in your classroom. When you're drawing onto your white paper, I'd like you to try to not press too hard. That's really important, is to make sure that you don't press too hard, because if you do, you're not going to be able to rub it out. When you've decided which white paper sculpture you've decided to draw, then I want you to really look at the shape of it. I want you to try and make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to stick to the shape that I showed you here because I really love that shape. I'm going to really enjoy drawing it. I'm going to start off in the corner of my piece of paper to try and make full use of the space. Now that is my smallest shape, so I'm not going to go too large straight away. Now you might not immediately be able to see what I'm drawing because I am pressing quite light. I'm looking to see whether my lines go past each other and the angles of my piece of paper, the one that I'm drawing from, my paper sculpture. Does my line go vertically? Does it go diagonally? Where is it actually going? And I say to my students at secondary school all the time, you need to look a lot. Always look. Because what I see students doing, my art students, is they look at their piece of paper and then they look at what they're drawing from, and then they look back at their piece of paper and then they forget to look back at what they're drawing from. And by the time they've been drawing for 5 minutes, they've forgotten actually what it looks like, the object that they're working from. And so that's when we start to get problems. That's when things start to go wrong. So when I'm drawing, I'm constantly darting my eyes backwards and forwards from what I'm drawing from to what I'm drawing onto. Okay, I can see that this swoops up here, and I'm not just looking at the space of the paper, but I'm also looking at the shape in between. Now you might not get it right straight away, and that's absolutely fine. Drawing is tricky. It isn't the easiest thing to do, and it just takes practice. And I know that that arch there goes higher than this one over here. There's a bit of an angle. I have used quite sketchy lines. You might be able to see my sketchy lines. And I think maybe that comes out a little bit wider, and I'm quite happy with that shape there. So now that I've drawn it out, and it's pretty much the shape that I want it to be, what I want you to do is I want you to decide which colours you want to do. Now we mentioned complementary colours. So if you remember, I said about yellow and purple. By the way, my watercolours here look very dark. I think it's important that you realise that these are all different colours, even though these and these and these look the same. So you might think, hang on a minute, why is Mrs. Murray Killen just using all these dark colours? You'll start to notice when I start to paint with them that actually it's because they've got so much pigment in them. They're really lovely colours, but you need to sort of add water to them to make them stand out. You'll see that as I start to paint. So decide which colours you want to use. I'm going to use, I'm going to use yellow and purple because we've been speaking about yellow and purple, and I think that would be a nice combination to use. But use it with caution, like I said before. If those colours mix together, what's going to happen is going to turn a nasty brown colour. Now there are two sides to this shape that I've done. There's the top side and the underside, top side and the underside. I'm going to stick to one colour on the top and one colour on the underside. Now with yellow and purple, yellow is the lightest colour, and you always start with the lightest colour. It's important to do that because you can go over the lighter colour with the darker colour once it's dry much more easily than the other way around. The other way around, if I painted with purple first and my purple went into my yellow zone, I wouldn't really be able to paint over it. So I'll always start with the lightest colour first. Now with watercolours, what you need to make sure that you do is that you use the lid that the watercolours come with, it's not just a lid, it's known as your palette, and that's where you mix your colours, and watercolour is watercolour because you add water to it. I'll put my white piece of paper underneath it so hopefully you can see the colours that I'm mixing. Okay, there we go, a nice vibrant yellow tone. Now I'm going to start with the top side being the yellow. It doesn't matter which way round you choose it, but that's what I fancy today. And I want you to look at your real paper sculpture, the one that you've been working from, and look at how the light falls across it. Where is it the darkest and where is it the lightest? Now I can see on mine that my darker tones are pretty much at the top and at the bottom, and as it doesn't burn round, as it curves around, then what tends to happen is it gets lighter in the middle. So as you can see, I'm starting off with that really bright yellow, and I'm going to just add some water. And as I start to add that water, it becomes more dilute. I've gone outside my line. I'm not going to worry about that at the moment. There's a lot of artists that love to let their colour flow outside the lines. So if that's happened to you like it's happened to me, it really isn't a problem. And I can see now on my paper sculpture that it is getting darker as it goes down to the bottom. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more colour, and I'm going to start on the very bottom. The reason I don't start here is because I want my colour to start to get lighter again as it comes over to the middle section. There we go. Try and avoid having dark lines in your watercolour. So it just means adding a little bit more water and slowly allowing your brush to work over the top. What you've got to be careful of though is that you don't scrub too much, because that's when your paper starts to disintegrate, it starts to break down. Okay, so that's one section of yellow, and then I've got another top side which is over here. So I'm going to do exactly the same process. I'm going to look to see where is it darkest, and actually it's very dark along the bottom here. So I'm going to add quite a lot of that dark yellow tone there, like this. And then I'm going to add lots and lots of water as it goes over to the top. You need to work fairly quickly with watercolour, because otherwise you do get lots and lots of dark lines. And it doesn't look particularly good. Mine's going a little bit green actually, because if you see my water here that I was using, I was painting in blue before, and so yellow and blue mixed together makes green. So if you're thinking, oh, why does Mrs. Work look a little bit green? Well, that's why. Okay. So now my next colour is purple for the underside. Now I don't want to go really, really dark with purple. I want to see where there's light and dark. And as I look at my paper sculpture, which is in front of me, you can't see it because of the way that my camera is, but it is in front of me. I can see that under here it's much, much darker, and here it is much, much darker. And in the middle, it's quite light. So it doesn't matter what colour I use, whether I use purple, whether I use grey, whether I use red, whatever colour it is that you've decided to choose, you've got to look and see, just like I did with yellow, you've got to make a darker tone and a lighter tone and a darker tone where you see it. So here we go. I'm going to pick up my purple, and I said to you that these are all different colours. I know that these are blues, and I know that this here is my purple. So just to prove it, there you go. You can see it's created my purple there. Now, once again, I'm going to start on my darkest tone, and my darkest tone is under here, and I've got to be very careful that my purple doesn't go into the yellow. So I'm just going to bring it down a little bit, and I'm going to control that purple. If I see that it starts to move up into the yellow, then I will stop. But thankfully, it's being super kind to me today, and it's not doing that. It's a very, very warm day, and I'm working on quite thick paper, so it is sucking up quite a lot of that water. And now I'm going to do the same thing as I did before, and I'm going to water it down, and I'm going to bring that purple down because I know that it's much, much lighter as it comes down. I can see that. And it's really quite light in the middle, so I'm not adding any colour at all now apart from the water, like like that. I'm just going to soften that dark tone like this. Oh, it is, can you see that? It's gone into my yellow. I'm not going to panic about that. What I'm going to try and do is I'm just going to try and lift up some of that colour. And sometimes these things happen in art, and that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to soften down that tone around the edge, and I'm going to make it look like a shadow. Things happen like this all the time. I often have my students get really upset if something has gone wrong with their piece of art. And you've got to work out ways of taking it forward. You've got to be resilient and say, okay, well, how can I solve this problem? And I had that problem, and you might have that problem too. But it doesn't mean, oh, I have to give up. It's not worked for me. You just work out a solution. And I can see the darker tone down there, but actually I quite like that. And now I'm going to bring my purple over here. It is much darker. If you want to avoid it going into each other, which in art, if two colours mix together, it's called bleeding together, funnily enough. But if you want to stop that from happening, you just make sure that your paint has dried fully before you do any colours next to it. But obviously working on a video, you sort of just have to go for it, really. And I can see it's happening to my other side, but actually it's good that it's happening to the other side because it will then match. I'm just going to try and pick up some of that colour. I'm going to turn it round now, like this. And I'm just using a clean paintbrush, wet clean paintbrush. I often do this with my paintbrush and it just pulls the bristles together like that. Okay, and then I've just got this last bit of purple to do, which is exactly the same process, but because it's a smaller curve, it's much darker, this one. So it's going to be quite dark. Like this, adding a bit more water, like that. Then once it's fully dry, what you can do is you can just use your pencil to create a little bit of tone around the edge and really help to make that shape look three-dimensional. Like this. And where my watercolour went out of the line, I'm just going to bring my pencil back into the shape that I want it to be and across the top like that. And I'm using a very, very light pencil as an HB. You can always go dark. I could get out one of my 4Bs, 5, even a 9B. I could go really, really dark and add some tone if I wanted to. I quite like this lighter pencil tone here, and it just creates quite an interesting structure, really. I think that looks really pleasing. You could always add some shading. I can see that where that sort of folded paper touches the ground, it creates a nice shadow, and you could do that with your pencil like that, but you don't have to. That's up to you. I'm going to bring some under here. That, and I can just see in the distance that flat triangle that I'd stuck. You know, it wasn't sticking up, it wasn't 3D, it was flat, it was 2D, and I'd stuck it down onto my black paper, and I can see that poking through, so I'm just going to add that into the background. And then when all of this is dry, I could do that a different colour, and then you might continue depending on how much time you've got, and thinking about, well, could I get one of my other paper sculptures in there? And could I do a different set of complementary colours? Could I do orange and blue? Or red and green? Or you might want to play around with colours that are very similar to each other. So you could do colours that are next to each other on the colour wheel. And you could do one orange and then yellow on the underside. So I want you to now start to create your drawing and then start to add your colour into it, whether it's going to be watercolours like this or whether you fancy doing some charcoal and chalk. It's the same process, the dark on the underside and the light on the top. And where I was adding the dark tone, I pressed quite hard, and then when I got to the middle where we know it's lighter, I've not pressed as hard and you can still see some of the blue showing through, and that helps to give the 3D shape. So now it's your turn to have a go, see what you can create, and I'd love to see some pictures from your teacher at the